The first time I lied to my own children, it wasn't with words, it was with silence. With the way I kept my shoulders rounded, like the world had pressed the money out of me, the same way grief had pressed the air out of my lungs. With the way I kept driving that old car that groaned like it had arthritis. With the way I still clipped coupons at my kitchen table, licking my thumb to separate the paper like I was counting pennies instead of guarding a fortune. For 5 years, I let them believe I was just a poor widow with a little brick house and a little garden and a little life that could be stepped over. And if you want to know why, you have to start with my husband. Because when my husband died, something in the air changed. Not just in the house, in people, in the way they looked at me. The way a woman becomes available the minute she becomes alone, available to pity, available to use, available to manage like a problem. Arthur died on a Thursday morning, quiet as a candle going out when no one's watching. The hospital room smelled like bleach and stale coffee, and his skin had that thin, papery look it gets when the body is already halfway out the door. He squeezed my hand with the last strength he had, eyes fixed on my face like he was trying to memorize it for wherever he was going next. "Don't get small," he whispered. "Promise me." I told him I wouldn't. I believed myself too, right then. But grief is a kind of weather. It doesn't ask permission. It moves in and changes the temperature of everything. After the funeral, after the folding chairs and the casseroles, after the last "call me if you need anything" that people say the way they say "have a nice day," I came home to a house that sounded wrong. Even the refrigerator hummed different. Even the floorboards felt like strangers. Arthur had filled space without trying. He was the kind of man whose presence was so steady you didn't realize you were leaning on it until it was gone. And my children didn't lose him the way I did. They lost a man. I lost my spine's twin. I used to be a woman with a voice that could fill a room without shouting. I built a business from a recipe and a stubborn belief that good food could make people feel safe. I stood in factories with hairnets and steel tables and told grown men twice my size that almost wasn't acceptable when my name was on the label. I negotiated contracts. I fired people. I fixed mistakes. I took risks. But when Arthur died, my children started coming around with that look. The look people get when they're scanning for what can be moved, what can be claimed, what can be rearranged now that the anchor is gone. At first it was small. "Mom, you should really think about downsizing. Mom, you shouldn't be alone all the time. Mom, do you know how much this house is worth?" Concern, they called it. But I've lived long enough to know the difference between concern and curiosity. Concern is warm. Curiosity is hungry. A few months after Arthur passed, I sold my company. I didn't do it because I wanted to. I did it because I was tired. Because every time I walked through my production line, I felt his absence like a missing note in a familiar song. Because the brand had become our shared child, and without him, touching it sometimes felt like touching a bruise. A big food corporation came with bright smiles and cleaner shoes than my factory floor deserved. They offered numbers so large I thought my lawyer had misread a comma. I sat in a conference room that smelled like polished wood and ambition, and I signed my name with a hand that didn't shake. When the money hit my account, it didn't feel like joy, it felt like weight. $25 million is not just money, it's a gravitational force. It pulls people, it bends relationships, it turns casual affection into strategy. So I told no one, not because I wanted to play games, because Arthur's last request was still ringing in my ears. Don't get small. And I realized something ugly that grief had taught me. If my children ever found out, they wouldn't let me stay full-sized. They'd shrink me with paperwork and help, and sweet voices that carry knives. So I built my experiment the way I built my business. Quiet, methodical, honest. I kept my little bungalow. I kept my old Buick. I kept my routines. I let the world keep thinking I was a woman making do. And I watched my children, not to punish them, to learn them. Because the truth is, when your husband dies, everybody tells you to lean on family. They say it like a prayer, like a guarantee. But I had begun to suspect something. Some families don't hold you up. Some families climb you like a ladder. My daughter Vanessa, she started calling me when she needed something that couldn't be posted on her social media. She had 2 kids, both wonderful, both loud, both full of that life force children carry like electricity. She lived in a neighborhood with expensive coffee and expensive dogs and sidewalks so clean they looked staged. Whenever she wanted a self-care day, she'd text me like I was was her calendar reminder. Mom, can you come tomorrow? The kids are a handful. I'm burning out. Burning out. That phrase became her passport to my labor. So I'd ride the train across the city, knees stiff, purse on my lap, watching my reflection in the window like a woman traveling toward a job she never applied for. She'd open the door with her hair already styled, perfume blooming in the air, and she'd kiss my cheek like she was checking a box. Thank God, she'd say, already reaching for her coat. Schedules are on the fridge, snacks are in the pantry. They already ate breakfast. Love you, bye. And then she'd vanish into her day, leaving behind a home that looked pretty in photos and lived in truth. The sink full of dishes, the laundry piled like a small mountain, toys everywhere like landmines. And me, I'd spend hours being everything: cook, cleaner, teacher, referee, comfort. I'd make soup from scratch because my mother raised me to believe love should taste like something. I'd help with homework. I'd braid hair. I'd scrub fingerprints off glass doors. I'd fold tiny shirts and socks that always seemed to multiply when you weren't looking. By the time Vanessa floated back in, glowing and relaxed, her face soft from a day spent in mirrors, she'd walk into the clean apartment like she'd conjured it with intention. "Oh my God, Mom, you're amazing," she'd say. And then she'd take out her phone. "Smile, babies." She'd line the kids up at the kitchen island, snap 10 photos, pick the best one, and post it with a caption about blessings and motherhood, and how hard she works to keep a peaceful home. And I wouldn't be in the picture. Not my hands, not my hours, not my soup, not my folded laundry, not my back that ached like it remembered every year I'd ever lived. I'd stand off to the side and feel myself become a ghost in a room I had rebuilt with my own labor. Then I'd go home, back to my little bungalow where my garden waited like a friend who didn't ask for performances. My son Marcus, he didn't use me the way Vanessa did. He dismissed me. Dismissal is colder, cleaner. It doesn't even need excuses. Marcus worked in real estate out in the suburbs where everything looks new, and nobody parks on the street unless they're lost. He spoke in the language of deals, and closing, and time is money, like he was born with a stopwatch in his hand. To him, I was an old chapter he didn't want people to read. A reminder that he came from a neighborhood where you lock your car doors without thinking. One winter, the furnace in my bungalow died. It was one of those Chicago nights where the cold feels personal, the kind of cold that creeps under your skin and sits on your bones like it plans to stay. I woke up and could see my breath inside my own house. My fingers were stiff just trying to dial my phone. I didn't call Marcus for money. I called for a name, a recommendation, a little guidance. He answered like I was interrupting a meeting with God. "Mom, what is it? I'm busy. My furnace went out," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's freezing. Do you know anyone reliable? I don't want to get scammed." He sighed so loud it felt like he wanted me to hear his annoyance more than my need. "Seriously? Today?" he snapped. "Mom, I'm in the middle of closing a huge deal. I'm not asking you to come," I said quietly. "I just need a number. Google it," he said like I was asking him how to split an atom. "Call somebody. You'll find someone who takes payments or whatever." Payments. That word landed like an insult dressed as practicality. He didn't ask if I was okay. Didn't ask if I had blankets. Didn't ask if I had somewhere to go. He just hung up. I stood there in my kitchen, cold air crawling up my legs, and realized the worst part wasn't the temperature. It was knowing my son heard the danger in my voice and still chose inconvenience over care. I handled it myself, called a company from an old phone book, paid for a new furnace in full with a check from the small account I kept funded so my lie looked believable. When the warm air finally returned, the house felt safe again, but I didn't. Because warmth from a machine is easy. Warmth from family is supposed to be natural, and mine was conditional. After 5 years of collecting these moments like evidence, I didn't feel surprised anymore. I felt clear. I was sitting at my kitchen table one morning, sipping tea when my phone buzzed with a message from a neighbor. "Is this you?" There was a link. I tapped it, and there I was. A professional photo from years ago, me in my prime, smiling like a woman who had built something real. Above it in bold letters on a big loud website was my secret, a feature story about the sale of my company, the exact net worth, the mysterious founder living quietly. The non-disclosure agreement had expired. Someone somewhere had decided my silence was now a headline. My stomach turned, not from fear of being exposed, from knowing exactly what would happen next. Because money doesn't just attract strangers, it transforms relatives. My phone started buzzing like a trapped insect. Calls, texts, missed calls, more calls. Marcus, Vanessa, again, like my existence had suddenly become urgent. I let it ring, not because I wanted revenge, because I wanted to hear the truth in their voices before they remembered to lie. By evening my voicemail was full. I sat down with a glass of wine and listened like a judge reviewing testimony. Marcus's voice was bright, booming, unfamiliar. "Mom, I saw the article. Oh my God, I'm just proud, so proud. We need to celebrate. I'm taking you to the best place in the city. My treat. Call me back. My treat." As if the man couldn't spare me 5 minutes during a furnace emergency, but now wanted to buy me steak like respect can be purchased in installments. Then Vanessa, she was crying, not real crying, the kind of crying meant for an audience. "Mommy, I had no idea. You must have been so lonely carrying this alone. I feel awful. If I ever seemed distant, it's because I was worried about you. We miss you so much. The kids miss you. Let's do something special. I love you. Worried about me." I stared at the wall while she performed love like a product launch. For 5 years they treated me like I was inconvenient because I was poor. Now they treated me like I was precious because I was rich. And that told me everything my experiment needed to tell. 2 days later they showed
up, not empty-handed. They came with gifts the way people come with bribes when they've suddenly remembered they want something. Marcus hauled a giant television box up my steps like he was delivering an apology in cardboard. Vanessa carried expensive grocery bags and a designer purse that looked like it had never known a real sidewalk. They smiled too hard. Their eyes were too bright. They looked like children who'd found out their teacher was giving out extra credit and suddenly wanted to be friends. I opened the door and didn't step aside. "Mom," Marcus said, voice warm like butter. "We just wanted to check on you. You shouldn't be alone with all this attention." Vanessa nodded fast. "We brought you food. Real food. And this bag, it's thoughtful," I said, and my voice stayed calm. I didn't invite them in. I didn't gasp. I didn't cry. I didn't melt the way they expected. Their smiles wavered. "Can we bring it inside?" Marcus asked. "You can leave it on the porch," I said. "I'll deal with it later." Vanessa's eyes tightened. "Mom, don't be like that. We just want to talk. Why didn't you tell us?" There it was. Not "Are you okay?" Not "I'm sorry." Just "Why didn't you tell us?" Like the secret belonged to them. I looked at my children standing there with their expensive props, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not anger, not sadness. A clean, hard understanding. "My finances," I said, "have always been private." Marcus's jaw tightened. "We're your kids." "Yes," I said. "You are." And I let that hang in the air with all the weight of what they hadn't been. Then I said, "Thank you for stopping by. I have things to do," and I closed the door. I turned the deadbolt. The sound was small, final, like punctuation at the end of a sentence they'd been trying to rewrite. A week later the lawyer letter arrived. A fancy firm downtown, professional language, ugly intent. They claimed they were concerned about my well-being, my isolation, my erratic behavior. They didn't say conservatorship. They didn't have to. I read it twice, then set it down like a dirty dish. And I called Beatrice my lawyer, my friend, the woman who had stood beside me in every negotiation since the company was small enough to fit in a kitchen. When I told her what they'd done, she went quiet. Then she said, low and delighted, "Oh, so they want to play." Her response wasn't emotional. It was surgical. She sent a reply that made their lawyer suddenly remember ethics and distance. She documented their harassment, their sudden interest, their pattern of neglect. She mentioned countersuits. She implied public exposure. Then she did the thing that made my children panic the way panic should feel, like consequences. She summoned them to her office for a formal clarification of my estate planning. They thought they were coming to negotiate a slice. They were coming to watch me donate the whole cake. The conference room overlooked the city like it was watching us too. The table was long enough to make people feel small at the far end.
I wore a navy dress. Simple, clean, the kind of outfit that says I didn't come to be emotional. I came to be exact. Marcus and Vanessa arrived with their lawyer. He looked slick in an anxious way, like a man realizing he'd been hired by people with ugly hearts and poor timing. They sat across from me like plaintiffs. Beatrice opened the meeting without warmth. "We're here to end the harassment," she said, "and to clarify once and for all Miss Perryweather's intentions." She slid a thick binder across the table. Their lawyer read the title aloud, confused. "The Perryweather Foundation." Marcus blinked. "What is that?" I spoke softly, but every word had a spine. "It's what my money is for," I said. "Now." I told them I was creating grants and scholarships for women in my city who were building food businesses, women with talent and grit, who needed a door opened, not a handout from someone looking for credit. Vanessa stared at me like she couldn't understand generosity that didn't circle back to her. Marcus's lawyer tried to recover. "That's very charitable, but my clients," Beatrice cut him off smoothly. "Ah, yes, their portion." She pulled out my updated will. This part wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a shouting match. It was worse for them. It was business. Their lawyer read the clause out loud because he had to. "To my son, Marcus Perryweather, I bequeath $1. Marcus's face went white, then red. The lawyer continued, voice tightening. "To my daughter, Vanessa Wallace, I bequeath $1. Vanessa made a sound like her lungs forgot how to work. Silence filled that expensive room, thick and holy. Marcus stood up so fast, his chair scraped like a scream. "You can't do this." I looked at him calmly. "I can," I said. And I did. Vanessa's eyes filled with tears, real ones this time, I think. Or maybe just better acting. It didn't matter anymore. "Mom," she whispered, "how could you?" I didn't raise my voice. "How could I?" I repeated softly. "You mean how could I stop funding people who treat love like a transaction?" Marcus's hands clenched. "We're your family," I nodded. "By blood." Then I said the sentence that had taken 5 years to form. "You didn't love me when you thought I was poor. You don't get to love me now that you know I'm rich." Beatrice closed the folder with a gentle snap. "This meeting is concluded." And just like that, the story my children thought they were living ended. Not with fireworks, with paperwork. After that, I changed my life. Not for them, for me. I sold the bungalow and bought a place with light. Real light, big windows, a view that reminded me there was a world beyond my children's appetite. I hired help when I needed it, and stopped treating exhaustion like a badge of honor. And I built the foundation. The first time I met the women who received grants, I felt something inside me unfreeze. They weren't looking at me like a vault. They looked at me like a bridge. One woman brought me a jar of her first small batch sauce and held it like it was sacred. Another told me she'd been cooking out of her apartment because she couldn't afford a commercial kitchen, and now she could. They spoke about their dreams the way people speak when they're hungry in the good way. Hungry to build, hungry to prove, hungry to give their children something different. That night, after the event ended, I stood by the window alone with my glass of water. The city glowed below like a field of stars that had fallen to earth and decided to stay. And I thought about Arthur. I thought about his last whisper, "Don't get small." I realized I had kept my promise, just not the way I imagined. Because for 5 years I pretended to be small, not because I was weak, because I was watching, because I needed to see whether the love coming toward me was love or just hunger. People think inheritance is blood, but I learned something at 70-something that I wish I'd learned at 30. Legacy is not who shares your last name. Legacy is who carries your values forward when you're not there to enforce them. I didn't lose my children to death. I lost them to greed. And that is a quieter kind of funeral. No flowers, no prayers, just an empty space where trust used to be. Sometimes I miss the version of them I raised. Sometimes I still reach for the phone on holidays out of habit, like my hands don't believe my heart. But then I remember that cold winter morning. The dead furnace. The way my son's voice cut me off like I was a nuisance on a schedule. I remember the way my daughter posted her perfect kitchen while my labor stood just outside the frame. And I remind myself, love that requires you to disappear isn't love. It's convenience wearing perfume. Now when I walk into my kitchen, it smells like herbs from my little planter and fresh bread from a bakery downstairs. My hands are older, yes. The skin is thinner. The veins show like blue rivers. But my spine is strong. And on some evenings when the light turns soft and the room goes quiet, I sit with the memory of Arthur beside me like a warm coat. I can almost hear him breathing. I can almost feel his hand in mine. And I tell him, in the stillness, what I wish I could have told him in that hospital room. I didn't get small. Not forever. I became precise. I became honest. I became a woman who understands that sometimes the kindest thing you can do with your fortune is to stop giving it to people who only learned your value when a magazine told them the price. Because in the end, money is just paper and numbers. But dignity is the only inheritance worth leaving behind. And if my children ever wonder why strangers are living in the place they thought they owned inside my future, I hope the answer haunts them gently, like a lesson whispered through a closed door. You don't get to harvest what you refuse to water. Not from me, not from life, not from love. Alright, here is the English version, rewritten cleanly in a cinematic granny's story tone, soft, dark, reflective, and emotionally heavy. This works perfectly as a continuation next part, and fits long YouTube narration pacing. People think that when money enters your life, everything becomes loud. Champagne, applause, revenge served hot and public. The truth is, real revenge is almost silent. When my children finally fell out of my life, or perhaps when I finally stepped out of theirs, the first feeling wasn't triumph. It was emptiness, a wide, honest kind of quiet. I would sit alone in my new apartment, glass windows stretching from floor to ceiling, the city glittering below like a promise made to someone else. From the outside I looked victorious, wealthy, untouchable, but inside I remembered. I remembered my son as a boy who couldn't tie his shoes without crying. I remembered my daughter at 6 years old crawling into my bed after nightmares, clutching my arm like I was the only solid thing in the world. And I wondered, when did they change? Or worse, when did I stop seeing it? Old age doesn't erase memory, it sharpens it. It slows life down just enough for you to replay every moment you rushed past when you were busy surviving. And slowly, painfully, I understood something I had avoided for years. My children were not born cruel. They were raised comfortable. They grew up believing a mother is permanent, always available, always forgiving, always adjustable. No one ever taught them that a mother is also a woman. A woman who gets tired, a woman who feels humiliation, a woman who can love deeply and still reach a breaking point. After my husband died, I didn't just become a widow, I became invisible. And when you become invisible, people stop performing kindness. They show you exactly who they are because they think no one is watching. The first time my son mentioned assisted living, he said it casually, practical, even. There are good places now, Mom. You wouldn't have to worry about things. His words were gentle. His eyes were relieved at the idea that I might take up less space in his life. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I stored the moment away. Because older women don't scream when they're hurt. They remember. Sometimes I still visit nursing homes now, not because I need one, but because I support them. I sit with women who smell like medication and patience. Women whose children call on Sundays, if at all. Women who wait quietly for attention that rarely arrives. They look at me like I am their future. And maybe I am. Sitting among them taught me something no business success ever did. Motherhood is a lifetime promise. Being a child is often a temporary role. My children never came back. Not to apologize. Not to understand. Maybe they thought I'd soften with time. After all, I'm old. After all, I'm their mother. But age doesn't make you weak. It makes you clear.
I didn't leave them money, because money would have rewarded their worst instincts. I left them consequences, and when people ask me if it still hurts, if my heart doesn't ache, I tell them the truth. Pain comes from hope, and I no longer live on hope. Now I spend my days with people who don't call me mom, but look at me with respect. People who don't expect anything from me except honesty. People who see my story not as an opportunity but as a lesson. At night I still think of my husband. His presence lingers like a steady hand on my back. Sometimes I imagine him saying, "You stood up, you didn't shrink." And maybe that's the real ending. I didn't win. I didn't lose. I simply stood up and walked away from people who only remembered me when they thought there was something left to take. If you're listening to this, and you're a mother, or maybe someone who will be one someday, remember this: it is your duty to love. It is not your duty to be consumed. And sometimes the bravest thing a mother can do is choose silence over being slowly erased. That silence is not weakness, it is dignity. Here are nights when sleep doesn't come easily, even now, not because of regret, but because memory is a stubborn thing. It arrives uninvited, sits at the edge of the bed, and asks questions you can no longer avoid. On those nights, I make tea the way I always have, slowly, intentionally. I let the kettle scream before I silence it, because even anger deserves a release before it settles. I think about the woman I was before motherhood shaped my spine into something permanently bent forward, always reaching, always bracing, always ready to catch someone else before they fell. I was sharp once, ambitious, a woman who built something with her hands and her mind, and somewhere along the way, I allowed love to turn me into a background figure in my own life. That is the quiet tragedy of many mothers. We do not collapse all at once. We disappear inch by inch. A cancelled plan here, a swallowed opinion there, a boundary postponed because they're just stressed. By the time we notice, we are standing in the doorway of our own lives, asking permission to enter. The day I realized I was no longer afraid of losing my children was the day everything changed. Fear is a powerful leash, and for years they held it without knowing. I had been terrified that if I said no, they would leave. Terrified that if I demanded respect, I would be alone. But the truth revealed itself gently, almost kindly. I was already alone. So I stopped negotiating with silence. I stopped translating neglect into love. I stopped explaining myself to people who benefited from misunderstanding me. And something unexpected happened. The world grew larger. I noticed small things again. Morning light on the kitchen counter. The sound of my own footsteps in a room that belonged to me. I learned that peace is not loud. It doesn't announce itself. It simply stays. People often ask if I miss my children. I miss who they were. I do not miss who they chose to become. That distinction matters. Missing potential is grief. Missing reality is addiction. And I have had enough of addiction disguised as loyalty. Now when I sit with younger women, daughters, mothers, caregivers, I don't give advice unless they ask. But when they do, I tell them this: love does not require self-erasure. Sacrifice is not supposed to be permanent, and respect should never have to be begged for. If someone only values you when you are useful, they do not value you. They value access. That is not love. That is convenience. I am in the winter of my life now, and winter has taught me something profound. Trees do not apologize for losing their leaves. They understand the season. I no longer chase understanding. I no longer chase reconciliation. I live. And in that living, I have found something gentler than revenge, stronger than forgiveness, and quieter than grief. I found myself. And this time, I'm not giving her away.